I just finished my debut romantasy novel with elemental magic, first draft, while working full-time as a project manager at a startup and raising 2 young kids. Here's how I did it. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany. I am a Brit living in Norway. I've lived here for about 14 years, and about 2 years ago I decided I was going to finally fulfill my dream of writing a novel. This is something I've wanted to do literally since I was like 6, I think, and I have just always felt afraid to do it. That's all it boils down to. I have carried on writing in some ways throughout my adult life. I went into journalism, copywriting, and then corporate communication before going into marketing project management. But I always had this fear of knowing deep down this was my ultimate dream, and knowing that it lived safer as a dream than actually trying it in reality. And what if I couldn't do it? What if it turned out bad? What if I wrote it and loved it and no one else did? I had all of these questions cropping up. However, I have just finished my first draft. It's about 80,000 words. It's probably going to be longer. I have some work to do with it. But it's getting there. And I did this while working full-time as a marketing project manager at a mobile game startup, working across time zones, long hours. I was recovering from surgery when I started. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And I've been raising 2 young kids, and I have found a way to do it. And I wanted to share today a little bit about how I got over the fear of writing, and then the tips that kept me going along the way, and maybe a little bit about what's going to happen next. So, story time. I was scheduled for a surgery, not a serious one, but I was going to be going under. I was going to be going under anaesthetic. I knew I'd have some waiting time, and I was rushing to the hospital, and I realised I hadn't brought a book with me. And I passed by this bookstore and I just like ran in. I was running late, so I just had to grab something. I went straight to the English section and I saw this beautiful looking hardcover book called A Court of Thorns and Roses. And it was like had this gold embellishment. I'd never heard of the author, had never heard of the book. This was it was in 2024. So can you believe I had not heard of this at that point? But it looked beautiful. It sounded fine. I was in a rush and I grabbed it. And cut to after surgery, I was at home. I was on high pain medication, couldn't do much except lie in bed and sleep. And I started reading this book, and it was a little bit slow getting into it, but if you have fallen into the massverse, you know how once you start falling in, you're there, you're in love, you're there for all of it. And I just digested this series, and it kind of created a spark in me of I had always loved and read books like Wheel of Time, Name of the Wind, like kind of these fantasy or sci-fi books that had complex worlds, very well thought out magic systems, could have like a whole, like book to go along with it explaining the lore and characters. And I think looking back, that had kind of set this precedent in my mind that for a book to be enjoyable and worth it and credible, it had to be very deep and very complex. And one of the reasons I love fantasy is because of how you can just get completely lost in another world, and how real and tangible and rich this completely alternative reality can be. And that's what drew me to those books. But then reading the Court of Thorns and Roses series, it came to light for me, like, okay, you can actually build a really rich world, a really compelling story, characters you fall in love with, an amazing method of escapism without making it complex, and without the writing being something, really poetic. And it just lowered the barrier for me. And that sort of started to plant the seed of, maybe I could do this too. Not becoming a multi-millionaire bestseller author like Sarah J. Maas, but putting a story down to paper that other people also fall in love with. Anyway, that was that. It kind of planted the seed. And then I actually had to have another surgery about a year later. And this one was a bit more serious. It was for a hysterectomy. And again, I was having to take time off work. I was on pain medication. I was having to it was painful even to walk around for a little while. And I went down the YouTube rabbit hole and I discovered this channel, Sarah Cullen, Heart Breathings. I will make a link in the description. And she had this whole series on writing, and I just, I think because that seed had been planted, I was kind of wanting to nurture this. I was kind of starting to have that tempting, could this be something? Could I really do it? Dare I dream? And it's much easier to consume content and feel like you're learning than to actually sit down and do the thing, right? So I consumed tons of her content. But she also had this challenge called the Rough Draft Challenge, which was off the back of NaNoWriMo. And as you might know, there was some controversy around NaNoWriMo. The whole movement has sort of fallen through a bit. If you don't know what it is, it's National Novel Writing Month. That's been going on for years and years. It's like an international movement to get a rough draft of a book written in 1 month. Anyway, some people started creating their own challenges once there was controversy around it, and she had her own. And so once I started to be, weaning myself off pain medication and getting my senses back to me, I decided I wanted to do this. I was going to give it a go. It was autumn, and autumn always has this it's a source of inspiration for me. The colours outside, the change in the air, the coziness, but there's still light. That whole combination has always been, has sparked inspiration for me. So it's just all the pieces were in place. I had time, I had motivation, I had finally, there was a crack in the veneer of the story I was telling myself about why I couldn't write. And yeah, I took some of her resources, I started thinking about it. And one of the tips that she had, and so this is the first tip, one of the tips she had was to retell a story. So to find a fairy tale or an existing story and just put your own spin on it as a thought exercise. And I remember also reading that Court of Thorns and Roses was also began as a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't actually checked, but I'd heard this. And so I thought, okay, you know what? It felt a bit like cheating, but I decided if that's going to get me over my blank page syndrome fear, then I'm going to try it. And I chose Rapunzel. I can't for the life of me remember why, but that's where I started. And my story, my series I'm working on now is not a retelling of Rapunzel, but the starting point was. I started to ask myself questions of why is she really stuck in the tower? What's the witch's motivation? What's their relationship really like between her and her rescuer? What happens after? And that sort of started to help spread out some branches of what my story would ultimately become. So tip number 1, if you are struggling to get the idea down on paper, or you have maybe kind of glimpses of what your story might be, but you're finding it hard to, form it into something cohesive to start outlining, start with a retelling of an existing story. There are no original stories. There are only original ways that you can tell it because it comes in your voice and you bring your experiences and perspectives into it. Tip number 2 is to find a way of crafting a story and to stick with it. So, I know there are many ways to craft a story out there. You have the hero's journey, you have the classical 3-act structure. There are many out there. And the one I looked at most in depth was Save the Cat. Right, so full title is Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I think it's a book, but you can also find resources online. I highly recommend getting the book if you're going to follow this structure. But my main tip here is to find a structure and stick with it, because it's so easy to spend so much time on figuring out how you're going to craft a story and to lean on these different scaffolding, and ultimately they can become a crutch for you. That's not very helpful if you're working more on how you're going to write the story instead of writing it instead. And I also remember when I started looking into this, how overwhelming it could be, because there are so many different ways to do it. And I started off trying to find the red threads in all of these different methods, but ultimately I came across Save the Cat. For me it works because I knew I wasn't going to write in chapters, at least for my first draft. The most important thing for me was to get the story down on paper, and also to make sure the pacing was right. So Save the Cat was fantastic for me. I'll give you the high level version of it. It's got 15 beats that you work through, and then once you've written, then of course you can go back and you can revise and do a developmental edit and put in chapters, etc. But for me it was extremely helpful. So find a structure that works for you and just stick with it. Coffee break. Okay, so I have 3 more tips for you. The next tip, and this one has been helpful for me time and time again, not just to get me started, but to keep me going right up until typing the words, the end. And that is permission to write badly. So I spoke a little bit about the books I enjoy reading and the kind of intimidation that has created in writing my own story. And that was really one of the blockers to me starting. And as soon as I gave myself permission to write badly, to just get the story down on paper, that was a light bulb moment for me. And I have now written those 80,000 words. I haven't edited and I haven't read them until a few days ago when I'd written the whole draft and now I've started to read through. So I have been on and off writing for about 1.5 years, sometimes in longer sprints, consistently every day, sometimes taking long breaks. But it's been about 1.5 years, and until a week ago, I hadn't read anything. And what that has meant is, as I am writing, I do not have that critic hanging over my shoulder. I have allowed the creative side of me to take the driving seat, to make sure that I am being open, I am allowing my mind to run freely, to be taken in different directions, to focus on just getting the story down. And now comes the time for the critic to stop being in the passenger seat and to come and, put a more critical eye on things. But I know myself, and had I read back on what I was writing or started to edit what I was writing, that would be such a slippery slope, because it would either mean I get stuck on editing and rewriting the same thing over and over, or it would demotivate me. Maybe I'd read back and be like, oh, that didn't come across the way I wanted, or oh, that doesn't read as well as it felt to write, and that would block me being able to continue. At least now I have something to work with. Yes, there probably are plot holes, or the pacing might be off, or wording might be very clunky or read more there's definitely at the moment more telling rather than showing, but I have work to massage. I have work to edit with. I got the bones down, and now I can work on tweaking that. So don't get paralyzed. Allow yourself to write badly. Tip number 5, I think we're on 5, that worked for me is, especially in the beginning, the first few months, again, I was working full time, and this tip is especially for you who are also working full time, or you have other obligations that take up significant chunks of your day, or other challenges like chronic illness and energy levels are hard to manage. And that is to get the writing done first thing. And what that meant for me was getting up before my family. And especially in the winter, this was a challenge. You know, it's very dark, it's cold, I was having to be quiet so I didn't wake anyone up. But it meant that no matter what the day threw at me, no matter what challenges came up, or, you know, like energy levels dropping, I had already done my writing for the day. And that was also fantastic when things got challenging at, for example, work, because I had already fulfilled this other part of me that I was craving, and that was to write. So whatever it means for you, however it looks like, I really recommend getting your writing done as early in the day as you can possibly do. And, you know, I know some people, it was really helpful to set word counts for the day, like a minimum amount of words you need to write. And sometimes that has been helpful for me. But by far more, it's been helpful to just make sure I've ticked that box of getting the writing done. I think it's a bit similar to if you've heard the phrase "eat that frog," and it basically means whatever your biggest challenge is that you have to get done that day or has the most impact, make sure you do it first. Like, for example, with work, you know, it's very easy to show up and start going through messages and emails and be leaving the thing that will really move the needle until later in the day, until you've got the easy admin stuff done. Well, the same applies with writing. Get it done first so that you have fulfilled that piece of you no matter what the day throws at you. Having said that, my final tip here is about staying adaptable and staying rooted in reality. So getting up early worked for me in the beginning, for the first few months, like I said. But work got really intense, so I was having evening meetings because I was working with the team both in Oslo and in the US. So I had evening meetings. I was working on a quiz show that inside our app we had a daily interactive quiz show, and I was going through every single question and quality reviewing it and making sure that we were ready for production, and that really ramped up at some point. So I was also working in the evenings, even outside of meetings, for that. And then just life with the kids and my own energy levels, and it just did not become sustainable to carry on getting up that early to write. And I was just thinking to myself, you know, if most of my day is dedicated to work and then the kids, I don't want to stay up late to write, because that just didn't, I found that when I was writing in the evening, it was very, very clunky. I was really struggling to put, you know, string a sentence together, so I knew that wouldn't work for me. So I had to adjust, and I had by this point had this really lovely routine of lighting a candle and putting on a playlist and making myself a tea and getting settled at my desk, which was great. You know, it really set me in the zone to write. But it just wasn't possible most of the time once this kind of block started to hit with getting up early. So what I did instead was just any time I had 15 minutes where in theory I could write, I had to make myself do it. And that meant writing on the sofa with headphones when I had my kids literally trying to climb on top of me, or shouting, dirty dishes and laundry piling up. I had to just find those moments in the day where, if my instinct was to be like, I could right now, but I don't want to, you know, I had to kind of distinguish, is it an excuse or is there a valid reason to not write? If there's a valid reason to not write, fine. Like, do not push yourself. Do not like burn yourself out with this dream of yours. But at the same time, be very careful to not get stuck into making excuses for yourself. So I had to pivot, and in the end, I would say like the last 30% of my first draft was written in 15-minute chunks here and there, where the conditions were not perfect. I wasn't waiting for inspiration. I just sat down and I did the damn thing. And there were some days where that was literally what I did, was 15 minutes, but it got me from start to finish. So don't make excuses. make a distinction between what's a valid reason and what's not. And as soon as you get that chance to write, don't wait for the perfect conditions, just do it. Because once you've got it down on paper, you have made progress, you can come back and tweak it. So I hope those tips were helpful. Let me know in the comments like what kind of tips work for you, or what kind of challenges you're having, and let's help each other out in the comments. And if you haven't dared to start your book yet, but you know you've always wanted to, let me know. Like, let's encourage each other. Life is too short to not pursue dreams and to be afraid of failing. So please start if it's something you've been wanting to do but haven't yet. And as for what's going to happen now with my book, so now I have the Mount Everest challenge of reading through and doing the developmental edit. And again, I'm using the Save the Cat. Save the Cat has some really helpful like questions to go through for each beat. Like, is it doing this? Is it doing that? Is your character approaching from this kind of point of view? Is it happening to them rather than because of them? Whatever. So I'm kind of going through, I've printed everything out, and that's really nice because then I cannot edit. I mean, I literally cannot edit, but I can make notes. So I'm reading through it, making notes. Once I'm done with the whole draft, doing that, I'm then going to go through and start doing a developmental edit. And I'm going to try and be strict with myself to not line edit, so to not, be too focused on making tweaks to the specific phrasings, things like that. Do the developmental edit. Then my thinking is to try and get some beta readers to make sure, like, do you even like these characters? Are you interested in book 2? Did everything make sense to you? Like, how does it make you feel, etc., etc. Then do a line edit, and I am thinking I'm going to self-publish rather than sending out query letters, and that is mainly because, one, I'm impatient, but two, because I know that so many people are writing their own books now, especially in romantasy, which is fantastic. We need more stories in the world. We need people to have their creative outlets and to tell their stories. Like, that is a good and positive thing. But I also think that's probably going to make it very difficult and slow to actually be traditionally published. And I just like the idea of being in control of my own writing career. Having said that, I haven't fully made my mind up yet, so I think I'm going to cross that bridge when I come to it. And meanwhile, I already have ideas bubbling for another series. So I'm trying to also be disciplined about not starting that one until I finished this one, and this one is going to be a 3-book series, I think, but we will see. And I'm going to share the journey here on YouTube, so I think my content is probably going to fall into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is going to be about life in Norway and hiking. Bucket 2 is about kind of re-finding myself in my 30s. A lot has happened in the past 3 years. I am 36 and I feel like I'm going into puberty again and sort of figuring out who I am in the world and what I want and what my identity is, which happens to be one of the main themes of the book I'm writing. So that would be another bucket. And then the 3rd bucket is about writing and, this dream of being a published author, creating worlds I'm in love with and that my reader base is in love with and that makes a difference to them. So if any of those 3 appeal to you, or hopefully all 3, then please hit subscribe, follow this journey, leave a comment, let me know where you're at, what your dreams are and what you need help with. And don't forget to give this video a like, because I have brought this channel back to life after a decade. So it's like I'm a newbie again, and a like and a subscribe and a comment of course really helps get this video out to the people who want to see it. And content like this really helped me. What matters to me, one of the reasons I'm creating this channel is because I want people who are out there feeling a bit stuck or feeling a bit alone or just really need that extra push to do the things in life that bring them joy. This video is for you and I want it to reach you. So like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for joining and I'll see you next time.